In this true crime documentary, we delve into the story and cold case of Herbert Mullen's path into madness. A journey where unimaginable becomes shockingly real. Step into the darkness of the human psyche, where the line between sanity and insanity blurs, and prepare to be captivated by the horrors that lie within. 72 years old, Herbert Mullen, an American serial killer, a man who believed he could prevent earthquakes by taking an unthinkable step, ending the lives of 13 people. It didn't matter if they were men, women or children, anyone in his path became a potential target. During the dark period from October the 13th, 1972 to February the 13th, 1973, a series of horrifying events unfolded, leaving a trail of 13 innocent lives tragically cut short. Herbert Mullen, who had clearly lost touch with reality due to a severe mental illness known as paranoid schizophrenia.
We don't know what triggers a paranoid disorder. There are a lot of theories early on that the reason somebody became paranoid was because they had unacted upon homosexual.
I mean, the hair on the back of my neck just stood up. I mean, it sent chills all the way down my spine.
His premise was that he had to save the world after hearing voices.
Mullen's terrible actions were like a real-life nightmare for the communities he terrorized. Everything started when he brutally attacked an alcoholic drifter with a baseball bat, which was a horrifying beginning to a series of terrible events. His heart was filled with darkness, and he didn't stop there. He horribly hurt a woman who was hitchhiking, and things got even worse when he killed a priest in a church confessional. He didn't show any mercy when he shot and stabbed a drug dealer's wife and their children, creating a scene of horror that was hard to imagine.
The voices told him that he was, one of the chosen people, and that it was God's plan that people had to be sacrificed.
He suffered from paranoid schizophrenia, a severe mental disorder that can distort one's perception of reality and lead to delusions. He actually believed that his victims communicated with him telepathically, seemingly giving him permission to commit these heinous acts to kill them to avoid earthquakes. But before we continue, please subscribe and drop a comment to help us making more fascinating true crime documentaries for you.
He was going to prevent cataclysmic earthquakes by killing people.
They were killed in very, very different ways, under different sets of circumstances, and from a law enforcement perspective, you can't make really a connection between these people.
Our story begins in the summer of 1972, a time when the counterculture movement was in full swing, and the world seemed to be changing at an unprecedented pace. Herbert Mullen, a young man with wavy hair and a disarming smile, grew up in this loud era. Friends and family remember him as a fun-loving, carefree guy with dreams of becoming a professional baseball player. Herbert was born in 1947 in the sunny town of Salinas, California, to a seemingly ordinary family. His early years appeared, for all intents and purposes, quite typical. Just like any other kid, he relished playing sports, had a circle of friends, and diligently attended school. But as we peel back the layers of his past, a terrifying story begins to unfold. The signs of trouble, lurking beneath the surface, slowly come to light. One critical turning point in Herbert's life came with the tragic death of his closest friend in a devastating car accident. This heart-wrenching event left an indelible mark on him, and it marked the first time he openly shared his peculiar beliefs with others. The weight of
To search for something that will make you better, and the psychological pain is something that many schizophrenics will talk about at some point, that they can't stand the pain that they're in.
The weight of this loss and his unique perspective on the world set in motion a series of events that would ultimately lead to a disturbing an unforgettable chapter in his life.
It's not that they need to put things in writing for any particular readers. It's just a compulsive recording of details, details, details.
As Herbert's obsessions grew, they led him down a dark and perilous path. He began to believe that he had a unique ability to foresee natural disasters, particularly earthquakes. In his distorted mind, he thought that the only way to prevent these catastrophic events was through human sacrifice. Herbert's life began to unravel, and his strange beliefs took centre stage. He would spend hours in the woods, searching for omens and signs that he could interpret. His family and friends watched in horror as he descended into a world of paranoia and delusion.
Mullen knows that the people who will be willing sacrifices will let him know. He sees a man on the road, he drives by, he hears a man say, "I'm Jonah, throw me over." There's the first one.
On October the 13th, 1972, Herbert Mullen's delusions took a sinister turn. Convinced that his actions were the only way to stop earthquakes, he embarked on a shocking and gruesome murder spree that would hit the community to its core. The first victim was a young hitchhiker. Herbert picked him up, seemingly friendly, and then, without warning, he stabbed the poor guy multiple times with a baseball bat. It was a gruesome crime scene, and we have no idea what had just been set in motion.
You know, when you work homicide, this cabin is one of those scenes that haunts me a little bit.
Herbert Mullen's reign of terror had begun, and the once peaceful community was gripped by fear. The police launched an intensive manhunt, but the elusive killer continued to strike, leaving a trail of bloodshed and confusion in his wake. Herbert Mullen's killing spree continued with a series of gruesome murders, each more shocking than the last. Mary Guilfoyle was his second victim in this period, and she met a horrific end on October the 24th. Mary, who was only 24 years old, was stabbed in the heart, chest and back, a truly brutal act of violence. After taking her life, Mullen even eviscerated her post-mortem, adding an extra layer of horror to this already gruesome crime. The priest, Father Henry Tommy, a 65-year-old man of the cloth, became the next victim on November the 2nd. He suffered a brutal fate, being beaten and fatally stabbed in the heart. In 1973, on January the 25th, Herbert Mullen claimed the lives of Jim Ralph, a 25-year-old, and Joan Guinera, a 21-year-old. Both were shot in the head and then subjected to repeated stabbings, making their deaths even more horrifying. The brutality of these murders, especially considering the young age of the victims, sent shockwaves through the community.
He went there for confession. He went into the confessional and discussed some things. One would hope it was his previous killings.
He then opens the door to the confessional and he stabs the priest in the heart.
Then, the brutal murder of the Francis family is one of the most harrowing and disturbing acts in Herbert Mullen's killing spree. The victims included Kathy Francis, a 29-year-old mother, and her two sons, Damon Francis, aged 4, and David Hughes, aged 9. In this horrifying incident,
awful about it was that the priest was, even after dying, bleeding to death, still said words to the effect, forgave him for what he had done, helped his life.
All three members of the Francis family were shot in the head, a brutal and tragic end to their lives. What makes this crime even more gruesome is that they were then repeatedly stabbed post-mortem, after they had already lost their lives. This level of brutality and violence is difficult to comprehend. Herbert Mullen's spree of violence took an even darker turn on February the 6th, when he targeted 4 teenagers at the Henry Carroll Redwood State Park. The victims in this tragic incident were David Allen Olker, just 18 years old, Robert Michael Spector, also 18 years old, Brian Scott Card, age 19, Mark John Drebelbis, the youngest of this group, at only 15 years old. In a horrifying act of violence, Mullen opened fire on these unsuspecting teenagers, taking their lives in a senseless and brutal manner. The peaceful and serene surroundings of the Redwood State Park became the backdrop for this gruesome tragedy, shocking the entire community. As the news of the murders spread, panic and fear descended upon the town. Residents were reluctant to go out after dark, and parents kept a watchful eye on their children. No one knew when or where the attack would occur. One of the local residents of the area stated that, "I remember the time like it was yesterday. We used to leave our doors unlocked, but suddenly we were locking everything up, and we'd check our cars before getting in. It was a terrifying period." And then, the 13th murder on February the 13th, 1973. The quiet Santa Cruz cliffs would be shattered by a single rifle shot, marking a tragic turning point in Henry Mullen's story. The victim in this case was a 73-year-old man named Fred Perez, who was simply going about his day tending to his gardening. A neighbour who had witnessed the car leaving the scene of the crime promptly reported it to the police.
Driving down the street on a Sunday morning, an elderly gentleman working in his front yard, and he shoots him, kills him, and drives off.
The car was soon intercepted, and behind the wheel was a 25-year-old Santa Cruz resident named Herbert William Mullen.
We got called to an area right off the road here, and there was an old man, dead, obviously been bludgeoned.
To many, he appeared to be a mild-mannered and unassuming young man, but the discovery of him as a suspect in these heinous crimes would send shockwaves through the community and set in motion a deep investigation into his dark and disturbing actions. One of the officers even stated that, when we arrested him, we found a notebook filled with his bizarre writings and drawings. It detailed his beliefs about earthquakes and the sacrifices he felt compelled to make. We couldn't believe what we were reading. Herbert's sister even said, after his friend's death, Herbert became obsessed with the idea that he could predict future events. He started talking about how the universe was sending him messages through songs on the radio and patterns in nature. We were all concerned, but no one could have foreseen what was to come. At that time, his mother once stated that it was heart-wrenching to see our son like this. He was a completely different person, lost in his own world. We tried to get him help, but he was convinced that he was the only one that could save the world from disaster. Extensive investigations into Herbert Mullen's past revealed a puzzling fact. His childhood appeared to be the most part quite ordinary and unremarkable until he reached his late teens.
Wonderful young man, and a few years later, he's a mass murderer and a serial killer. I mean, that's not something that happens to the average person.
There were no significant or unusual signs that would have pointed to the violent path he would later tread. In those early years, Mullen's life seemed no different to that of any other young person. His seemingly typical childhood and adolescent, devoid of any glaring red flags, made it all the more baffling when his life took a dark and horrifying turn in his late teens and beyond. He shifted away from his Catholic upbringing and embraced an intense interest in Eastern religions.
After high school, he started clearly deteriorating mentally.
This transformation was marked by his decision to register as a conscientious objector, meaning he opposed participating in military service due to his newfound spiritual beliefs. This shift in Mullen's religious and philosophical views marked the beginning of a stark change in his behaviour. His family, who had known him as a different person during his early years, began to suspect that drugs played a role in these extreme changes. The connection between his altered spiritual interests and the influence of drugs became a cause for concern and would eventually be explored in depth by investigators trying to understand what drove him to commit such heinous acts.
I don't think that I had a conscious intention to engage in that much boxing every day for 4 or 5 days a week for, 6 months?
In the heart of Tenderloin District, investigator Cartwright managed to locate one of the rundown hotels where Herbert Mullen had resided at some point. This discovery added a crucial piece to the puzzle of Mullen's life and activities, shedding light on the places he had called home and the environments he had been part of. The investigation was gradually uncovering more about the life and movements of this enigmatic serial killer.
He felt that Gennaro had introduced him to marijuana, and that had been the thing that had really ruined his life.
Herbert Mullen made a choice to start his devastating killing spree on the 13th day of October in 1972. Over the course of 4 horrifying months, his spree claimed the lives of 13 innocent people. What's even more eerie is that his final victim also met a tragic end on the 13th day of the month. The fact that Mullen chose to begin and end his killing spree on this particular date adds a disturbing layer of coincidence or perhaps superstition to his actions. The number 13 would be forever associated with the dark and tragic events that unfolded during this period, leaving a lasting mark on the community and the history of these senseless and brutal murders.
State of mind is really what this case turned out to be all about.
The defense argued that Mullen was legally insane at the time of the crimes. He claimed that he suffered from severe mental illness, including schizophrenia, which impaired his ability to understand the wrongfulness of his actions. He asserted that his beliefs in voices and delusions drove him to commit these acts. After 3 days of careful deliberation, the jury reached their verdict in the case of Herbert William Mullen. They determined that he was legally sane at the time of his crimes. As a result, he was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder and 8 counts of second-degree murder. The verdict left some questioning the nature of Herbert Mullen. While some might simply label him as just another madman, it's important to consider whether there might be more to this killer than initially meets the eye.
Sort of playing a killjoy sadistic game on my life, on my mind. I think my family and my neighbors, they knew that I was committing the crime.
The victim's family member stated, "We got justice for our loved ones, but it's a bittersweet victory. To this day, I wonder how someone could be so lost in their beliefs that they'd commit such unspeakable acts." The complexities of his case, including his mental health, the influence of drugs, and his seemingly ordinary early life, raise important questions about the factors that drove him to commit these heinous acts. Herbert Mullen's story serves as a chilling reminder of the depths of human psychology and the capacity for darkness that can lurk within anyone. Herbert Mullen maintains an argument that his crimes were as a result of nurture rather than nature. In other words, he suggests that his environment and life experiences played a more significant role in shaping his actions than any inherent or genetic factors. This perspective raises the question of whether external factors, such as his upbringing, influences, and experiences, may have contributed to his descent into violence. For the investigator who dedicated months to uncovering the life and mind of Herbert Mullen, the answer to the question of whether he should be released is very simple. The investigator firmly believes that considering the lives he has destroyed, it's a straightforward decision. Not only were the lives of the victims he killed taken away, but Mullen's actions also left a trail of shattered families and communities. Herbert Mullen, 75 years old, the individual responsible for a series of gruesome murders during the 1970s, passed away from natural causes on August the 18th, 2022, He was at the California Healthcare Facility in California, United States at the time of his death.